Chapter 4 Everblaze. The warm, racing light dropped them at the base of the Himalayas, and Kif pulled his cape tighter around his shoulders. Couldn't they have picked a warmer mountain range to build this place? He grumbled as he trudged up the snow covered path to the sanctuary. I'm pretty sure they needed as much room as possible, Sophie reminded him. The sanctuary housed all of the creatures that the elves had taken into protective custody. Everything from dinosaurs to dodo birds, plus any animal that humans foolishly believed was magical. They even kept endangered species, wanting to make sure they continued to thrive. The elves believed every creature existed on the planet for a reason, and to allow even one to go extinct would cause irreparable damage to the delicate balance of their world. An icy blast of wind cut through Sophie's stomach, making her wish she'd worn a cape. She always felt dumb wearing them, but braving the snow without a cloak was definitely dumber. She also wished she'd taken Dex's offer a few months back and let him teach her how to regulate her body temperature. Here, Kif said, draping his cape over her shoulders. I'm fine. You don't have to. That would be a lot more convincing without all the shivering, he interrupted. Besides, it takes more than a little snow to get to me. He flashed a smug smirk, but she could see he was already shivering. You don't know how to regulate your body temperature either? She asked, feeling her voice steady as Kif fastened the warm cape around her chin. That only works when it's sorta cold, not freezing. But no, I've never learned. That's the kind of random skill you only learn in Exilium. The name caused a whole different kind of shudder. Exilium was a school the council had threatened to send Sophie to if she couldn't hack it at Foxfire. She didn't know anything about it, except that people kept telling her she didn't want to go there. Why does Dex know how to regulate his temperature then? Sophie asked. The only school he'd ever attended was Foxfire. Keith laughed. Are you really surprised his family would teach him something weird? Good point. Dex's parents were known for playing by their own rules and not following social conventions. His dad had even admitted that he designed their store, Slurps and Burps, to be intentionally bizarre and chaotic, just to make the stuffy nobles, as he liked to call them, scream while they shopped for their elixirs. Kev shivered again, his whole body shaking, and Sophie tried to hand him back his cape. Nope, you deserve it, Foster, he insisted. You have saved my life a few times, after all. Only once, Sophie corrected. Yeah, well, you also saved the whole world from the Everblaze, so that counts too. Plus, I'll face the wrath of the Gigantor if I let you freeze to death, remember? Well, thanks, she mumbled as he pulled the hood up over her head, warming her icy ears. He held her gaze for a second too long before he backed away and shrugged. Just don't lose that sense and crest. My father will strangle me. He clearly meant it as a joke, but it reminded Sophie of his mother's bruise, and the way she tried to hide it, and the way Lord Cassius had rushed them out of there after she saw it. So, she said, not quite sure how to broach the subject as they went back to trudging through the snow. Everything's okay at your house, right? If you leave out my father's constant lectures on how I'm not living up to my potential, then yeah. Why? No reason. Psh, there's always a reason with you, Foster. Spill it. Sophie tugged out a snow covered eyelash, wishing for a little extra courage. Sorry about that. Wait. Sophie tugged out a snow covered eyelash, wishing for a little extra courage as she flicked it away. Just, your dad doesn't ever give stop walking. Ever what? Sophie sighed. This was so much harder than it seemed on television. When your dad gets angry, does he ever hurt anyone? The last words came out as a whisper. Keith laughed, but his smile quickly faded. Wait, you're serious? Wow, I know my dad has the whole stern and crazy, scary thing going for him, but still, that's crazy. So that's a no then, she asked, needing to hear him say it. Yeah, definitely a no. You really thought I don't know. Your mom had a red wound on her shoulder. She did? Yeah, and your dad looked like he didn't want me to see it. Kay frowned. Well, I have no idea what that was about, but it's not what you're thinking. People don't do that around here. Remember, the whole guilt shattering our sanity thing? That goes for violence too. The elves did seem to be incredibly peaceful. They didn't even have police. And yet, Sophie could still remember the searing pain as her kidnapper burned her wrists, trying to force her to answer his questions. She could still see the dead look in Dex's eyes as the rebels blasted him with a paralyzing melter over and over. She could still hear the crunch of Sylvanus' wing breaking when the rebels dragged her out of the sky right before they broke several of Gift's ribs in a fight. Either elves were capable of more than they realized, or the rebels were insane. She didn't know which would be worse. Okay, well, sorry, she said quietly. I just wanted to make sure. No need to apologize. It's nice to know the mysterious Miss F cares. Neither of them seemed to know what to say after that, so they walked in uncomfortable silence as their flat shoes crunch, crunch, crunched through the snow. I don't understand how humans haven't found this place, Sophie said when they reached the towering silver gates set into the mountain. But then she spotted the brown black obscurus scattered among the various rocky outcroppings. Careful, Kif warned, pointing at a bunch of silver fork like gadgets that were stabbed into the ground next to some of the rocks. Those are refluxers. Step too close, and they'll make you stink like you've been hanging around a pack of gullens. My dad set one off while the gnomes were installing them, and when he got home, I could smell him all the way on the 187th floor. I guess the smell damages ogres' sinuses or something. Ogres? Sophie asked, taking a giant step away from the stinking gadgets. Yep. One of the goblin patrols found some weird footprints a few nights ago and thought they might be from ogres. They couldn't tell for sure because the tracks had no scent, and by the time Alvar got here, Fitz's brother? Sophie interrupted. Yeah, he's been working with the ogres for a few years, so my dad figured he'd be able to tell if they were involved. But by the time he got there, it had snowed and the tracks were gone, so the council had the effluxers installed just in case. Okay, Sophie said slowly, but I thought we had a treaty with the ogres. We do, but that doesn't mean we trust them. Look at what happened with humans. Throughout the centuries, the elves had signed treaties with all of the intelligent creatures trying to ensure peace. But humans decided they wanted to rule the world, and in order to prevent a war, the elves chose to disappear. They still watched from the shadows, finding subtle ways to share their wisdom when they could. But the humans continued their path of violence and destruction, and eventually the elves had to cut off contact completely. And yet, the Black Swan broke every law, risking their sanity and their lives, specifically so they could hide Sophie among humans. She still didn't understand why. Why would the ogres care about the sanctuary? She asked, studying the massive gates. Hello? Sylvan is in there. Remember the whole timeline to extinction thing? She did. The elves had been searching for a female alicorn for decades, desperate to breed her with the only alicorn they'd ever found, a male already at the sanctuary. If they couldn't start repopulating the species soon, alicorns would be the first creatures to go extinct. But Sophie still didn't see why ogres would care about a couple of sparkly flying horses. Grady had told her once that ogres didn't value animals' lives the way elves did. What else would have made the footprints, though? Do we need to knock or something? She asked, ready to get to the other, much safer side of the gates. I'm sure they're scanning our registry pendants right now to make sure we have the right clearance. Sophie's hand darted to her neck, her fingers closing around a triangular crystal hanging from her choker. The council had added extra chains to hers after the kidnappers cut her first pendant off, but she still liked to double check that it was there. Finally, Giff said as a loud clang echoed off the mountains. The ground shook when the silver gates swung apart and a blast of warmth prickled Sophie's skin as she followed Giff into the sunny paradise. She knew she was walking deep into a mountain range, but she had a hard time believing it as she stared at the lush meadows and forest of flowering trees that seemed to stretch on forever. The sky was a perfect cerulean blue, though it shifted with every step, flashing through the colors of the spectrum as if they were walking inside a rainbow, and the air had a crisp sweetness like biting into an apple. How much of this is real? She asked, rubbing her eyes, half expecting it to disappear. The sky is an illusion, and they hid the walls to make the space feel bigger, but everything else is real. How did they? You're late, a tall, skinny elf interrupted as he stepped out of a clump of bushes. His chocolate brown tunic was covered in bright green patches, and his thick black hair hung in long tangles. Do you have any idea how much trouble that cost me? Sorry, sir, Sophie mumbled, avoiding his piercing blue eyes. He laughed, a bitter sound that felt sharp in her ears. I am many things, Miss Foster, but I'm definitely not a sir. You may call me Jurek. I'm the equestrian caretaker for the sanctuary. And I was right, wasn't I? Sophie glanced at Kif, but he looked as confused as her. Right? Jurek pulled a lumpy satchel out of one of the bushes and slung it over his shoulder, motioning for Sophie and Kif to follow him. You couldn't teleport here, could you? No, she admitted. How did you know? He smiled. Tell me this. If you could teleport into the sanctuary, why have the alicorns never teleported out? That was a very good question. She squinted at the rainbow sky, which wasn't really a sky at all. Is it the mountains? That'd be my guess. Cave slight leapers away. Why not teleporters? But then, what do I know? I'm not the only one. I'm not the one with the fancy abilities and the strange eyes. Well, you clearly knew more than me, she said, ignoring the insult. She was getting used to being the only brown-eyed elf. So wait, she can teleport through anything solid? Kip asked, frowning. And Jurek and Sophie both nodded. Dang, that's going to kill a bunch of my plans. But don't worry, Foster. There's still plenty of ways we can cause trouble. He nudged Sophie, but she couldn't return his smile. She'd like knowing that if the council didn't give permission to heal Prentice, she could teleport to exile on her own. But the isolated prison was buried deep in the center of the earth, so if she couldn't teleport through anything solid, there was no way she could reach it on her own. Whoa, hang on a minute, Kif said, stepping in front of Jurek to block his path. You didn't think it might be a good idea to be like, hey guys, the teleporting to the sanctuary thing might not work out so well. You could get trapped in the creepy black voidy place. Actually, I told her father, who informed me that as talentless, it's my job to tend to the animals and prepare for visitors, not to pretend to know things about special abilities. Sophie cringed. Elves without special abilities were just as wealthy as other elves, and supposedly they were still equals, but they also didn't qualify for the elite levels at Foxfire, couldn't become members of the nobility, and wore different clothes for their jobs in working class cities. And sometimes it seemed like people saw them as lesser. But that mostly happened with jerks like Vika, Timken, and Stina Hex, a family who loved to think they were better than everyone. Sophie hated to think that Grady was like that too. Grady really said that? She asked quietly. Who's Grady? My father. She was surprised at how easily the word rolled off her tongue. Grady and Edeline had only adopted Sophie about 3 months earlier after a rocky process, and she still didn't quite feel comfortable calling them mom and dad. Drake pointed to the Sensen crest on her cape. I thought the Lord Kishos was your adoptive father. Oh, no, this is Kif's. And she could totally see Kif's dad saying that. Drake snorted. I guess I should have known. They both have that same smug smirk. Yeah, but I have better hair, Kif said, mussing it even more as Sophie gave him back his cape. Let's hope that that's not the only way you're better. Jerk walked away without another word. Kif rolled his eyes like he didn't care, but Sophie noticed he hid the Sensen crest in the thick folds of his cape before he followed. She trailed silently behind, staring at the shimmering flowers and trying to think of something to say. After several awkward seconds, Kif cleared his throat. So where's Glitterbot? He means Sylvanie, Sophie clarified, and she'd been wondering the same thing. The pastures around them only held grazing mammoths, feathery dinosaurs, and enormous wolf bear things. All equestrians are in the violet pastures, Drake explained, as he veered off the path to cut straight over a line of hills. The long blue grass was slick with dew, and Sophie struggled not to slip as she ran behind him. By the time they crested the last hill, she was sweaty and out of breath, but she didn't mind one bit when a familiar voice filled her mind. Friend! Sophie! Kif! Visit! Yes, Sophie transmitted back, shielding her eyes as she tried to find her. A pair of silver and black unicorns galloped in one of the purple grassed fields, and a silver river was lined with strange bluish green horses that seemed almost slimy, but no sparkly alicorns in sight. She prefers the pastures down here, Jurek said before plopping to the grass and sliding down the hill. Kip launched after Jurek immediately, but Sophie stared at the slope, fairly certain the slide would end with an Elwyn visit. It was only when Kip shouted, Come on, Foster, don't wimp out on me now, that she dropped to the ground and pushed off after them. Bits of grass and mud peppered her face, and she could tell her backside would be bruised for days, but she bumped and bobbed and somehow made it safely to the bottom. Well, almost safely. Stopping was harder than she'd thought, and she'd ended up crashing into Kif's, knocking him on top of her. You know, if you're trying to sweep me off my feet, there are less painful ways, he told her, laughing as he struggled to stand. Sophie turned away to hide her burning cheeks. Was the sliding really necessary? She asked Jerks. No, but it was fun. Jerk tossed his wild hair, sending bits of grass flying. Friend! Sophie! Kif! Fly! Sophie spun toward the sound, feeling tears prick her eyes as she spotted a glittering streak, flipping the somersaults in the rainbow sky. Part of her had worried Sylvain's wing wouldn't ever heal properly, but clearly she was good as new, and just as sparkly as ever. She's happy to see me, isn't she? Kif asked. Not as happy as she is to see me, though Sophie wished there was a bit less Kif filling her head, and she was less than thrilled when Sylvanie tucked her wings and dove, landing next to Kif with an exuberant whinny. See? Glitterbot loves me. Kif reached to pat her sparkly rump, but Sylvanie scooted away, snapping at her tail. I told you she hates that nickname, Sophie said smugly. She tried to call Sylvanie to her side, but Sylvanie was too busy chasing her tail to obey. Kif frowned. Do you feel that, Foster? Sort of. Sophie closed her eyes, trying to sort through the dizzying emotions swirling in her head. She'd forgotten how overwhelming Sylvanie's energy could be. Calm, she transmitted, but Sylvanie kept on spinning, and the more she circled, the more Sophie picked up a darker emotion in the mix. Why are you afraid? She asked, repeating the question until Sylvanie finally stopped to look at her. A rush of fear clawed at Sophie's mind like an angry vermilion, and she stepped back, needing room to breathe. What is she afraid of? It's probably easier to show you. Jurek opened the satchel he'd been carrying and pulled out a handful of twisted blue stalks, filling the air with spicy cinnamon scent. Sylvanus' hunger clouded Sophie's mind, but the alicorn backed away from the treats. Why would she? An ear-splitting whinny cut Sophie off, and Sylvanie reared back as a blur of silver dropped out of the sky. Jurek barely managed to pull Keith out of the way before a huge alicorn with blue-tipped wings landed right where he had been standing. This is Greyfell, Jurek said, tossing the handful of treats to distract the new alicorn while he swung a golden lasso around the massive horse's neck. Greyfield bucked and thrashed and wrestled against the restraint, but Jurek managed to hold tight. He's a resident male, and up until a few days ago, he and Sylvanie were getting along just fine. So what changed? Sophie asked as Sylvanie screeched and launched back into the sky. I have no idea. Jurek tried to stroke Greyfell's nose, but the alicorn glared at him with the coldest brown eyes Sophie had ever seen. That's what you're here to figure out, and you'd better do it quick. Otherwise, I'm afraid he's going to kill Sylvanie.